What happens when an image moves from one context to another? An image is never just an image. The same image can tell very different stories depending on where it appears, who sees it, and how it is used. Take a photo of people gathered for a religious ceremony. In a family album, it's intimate. In a news archive, it might become political. On social media, it may become searchable, shareable, and exposed to a completely new audience. Visual data are never neutral pieces of information. They carry traces of the situation in which they were produced, the relationship between researchers and participants, and the social or cultural setting in which they circulate. This is what we mean by context sensitivity, and this is why generic open data guidelines are not enough for visual research. So how should context be considered at each stage of the research process? Let's say you're planning to document a religious ceremony as part of your research. In the conceptual phase, ask how the context surrounding your visual data might influence its interpretation, sharing, and future reuse. Thinking about this early helps you anticipate ethical and methodological challenges before they become problems. This means clarifying from the start what counts as visual data in your project and what role it will play in the research. At the same time, consider consent, data protection, reuse, and degrees of openness. These decisions are closely connected. The context in which you photograph that ceremony will affect whether the images need to be anonymized, how you collect consent from the people attending, and how openly you can eventually share them. During the archiving and preservation phase, when fieldwork is done, you're preparing those ceremony photos for long-term storage. Visual data do not suddenly become neutral on trusted repositories. Preservation means maintaining the contextual integrity of images over time. So archiving is a process of contextual documentation. Attach clear metadata, captions, and accompanying materials so that the visuals remain understandable beyond the original research project. In this way, everyone can understand what they're seeing, preventing images from being misinterpreted, decontextualized, or misused later. Context sensitivity also directly shapes decisions about anonymization, consent, and degrees of openness. Visual data should be considered case by case, balancing participant protection, ethical responsibilities, and research value. Sometimes, restricting access or choosing not to publish the material may be the most responsible decision. Archiving is therefore about preserving not only the data, but also the ethical and contextual conditions under which it may be accessed and reused. In the reuse phase, context sensitivity becomes especially important since how interested persons may reuse depends on understanding the original research context and respecting the conditions under which the visual data were created and may be reused. Without that understanding, there is a risk of decontextualization, misinterpretation, or ethical misuse. And this risk is especially high for visual data, which carries so many contextual cues and can be difficult to anonymize fully. For this reason, reuse should rely on clear documentation. Metadata, licenses, and guidelines for future data use should communicate the original research aims, consent conditions, permitted uses, ethical reflections, and relevant social or cultural sensitivities. Not every form of reuse will be appropriate. Say you collected and adapted those ceremony photos under a license that only permits reuse within similar kinds of research. If another researcher later wants to include them in a new dataset, they cannot simply grant broader permissions to whoever comes after them. This limitation helps prevent the images from circulating beyond the context for which they were originally intended, when an open license would be inappropriate. Secondary users should consider both permitted access and permitted reuse, ensuring that the material remains consistent with its original context and ethical commitments. To learn more about context sensitivity, visit codevis.org.